The arrival. The sky turned dark without warning. It wasn't the clouds or a storm. It was something far worse. Across the cities of Earth, people stopped what they were doing and looked up. A massive shadow covered the sun, spreading fear across the planet. The first ship appeared over New York City. Its surface shimmered like liquid metal, reflecting the terrified faces of the humans below. Then came another ship and another. Soon, the entire sky was filled with colossal alien vessels, their engines humming like thunder. In a hidden base beneath the Rocky Mountains, Dr. Elena Hayes stared at the screens in disbelief. She had spent her whole life preparing for this moment, but now that it was here, she felt a cold knot of fear in her chest. "They've arrived," she said, her voice shaking. Around her, the control room buzzed with activity. Soldiers, scientists, and engineers scrambled to make sense of the data pouring in. "How many ships?" one of them asked. "Too many," Elena replied. "This isn't an invasion. It's an extermination." High above Earth, on the largest of the alien ships, the alien king watched with a cruel smile. His throne room was made of black glass, and his golden armor gleamed under the strange light of his homeworld's star. His eyes were cold and calculating, like a predator sizing up its prey. "Humans," he said, his voice echoing through the chamber. "They have always been pests, clinging to their fragile planet. But no longer. Today, their time ends." His generals stood before him, their heads bowed in submission. They were tall, with gray skin and glowing blue eyes, their bodies enhanced with cybernetic implants. One of them stepped forward. "Your Majesty, the fleet is ready. We await your command." The alien king raised his hand, his sharp claws catching the light. "Begin the attack. Show them the strength of the royal fleet." On Earth, chaos erupted. The alien ships unleashed their weapons, beams of energy so powerful they vaporized entire buildings in seconds. Cities burned as people screamed and ran for their lives. Governments around the world tried to respond, but their missiles and fighter jets were no match for the alien technology. In Tokyo, a young boy clung to his mother as the ground shook beneath them. In Paris, a firefighter risked his life to save a group of children trapped in a collapsing building. Across the globe, ordinary people became heroes in the face of unimaginable terror. But it wasn't enough. The aliens were too powerful, and humanity seemed doomed. Back in the hidden base, Dr. Hayes clenched her fists. "We can't just sit here and watch this happen," she said. A young officer looked at her nervously. "But what can we do? Our weapons can't penetrate their shields." Elena turned to him, her eyes blazing with determination. "We have something they don't expect." She walked to a control panel and pressed a button. A holographic map of Earth appeared, showing dozens of secret installations hidden across the planet. Project Sentinel. The room fell silent. Everyone knew about Project Sentinel, but it was considered too dangerous, too untested. "We don't have a choice," Elena continued. "The aliens think we're weak. They think they can destroy us without a fight. But they're wrong." Meanwhile, in the alien king's throne room, a strange alarm sounded. One of the generals approached him, holding a glowing device. "Your Majesty, our systems have detected an anomaly. A signal from Earth is interfering with our weapons." The alien king frowned. "A signal? What kind of signal?" "We don't know, but it's coming from multiple locations. It's human." The king's frown deepened. He leaned forward on his throne, his sharp teeth glinting as he spoke. "Humans. How could they disrupt our systems? Find the source of the signal and destroy it." The general bowed and left the room. But as the alien king stared out at the burning planet below, a strange feeling crept over him. It wasn't fear. He didn't believe humans were capable of such a thing. But it was something close to doubt. In the hidden base, Dr. Hayes worked quickly, her fingers flying over the keyboard. The signal she had sent was only the beginning. It was a distraction designed to buy humanity some time. On another screen, she saw images of the devastation. Cities in ruins, millions of lives lost. Her chest tightened, but she forced herself to stay focused. "We've been underestimated before," she whispered to herself. "This time, it's their mistake." The officer next to her looked at her with hope in his eyes. "Do you really think we can stop them?" Elena didn't answer right away. She knew the odds were against them, but she also knew what humanity was capable of when pushed to the brink. "We don't just survive," she said finally. "We fight back." As the alien king's fleet continued its attack, something began to change. Across the planet, the secret installations of Project Sentinel came online, sending signals that disrupted the alien ships. For the first time, their weapons faltered, their shields flickered. The alien king stared at the reports in disbelief. "Impossible," he hissed. "These creatures are more resourceful than I thought." But he wasn't worried. Not yet. He had brought his entire royal fleet to Earth, and he was determined to win. What he didn't know was that humanity's true strength was only beginning to show. Humanity's secret weapon. Beneath the Rocky Mountains, the hidden base was a hive of controlled chaos. Screens blinked with data, and alarms blared every few seconds. Yet, amid the noise, Dr. Elena Hayes worked with laser focus. The first phase of her plan had worked. The alien fleet's systems were disrupted, but she knew it was only a matter of time before the alien king adapted. "How long until they trace the signal?" Elena asked, her voice cutting through the noise. 5 minutes, maybe less," replied Lieutenant Mason, a young officer standing beside her. His hands trembled as he typed on his tablet, but his voice stayed steady. Elena nodded. "We need to act now." On the alien king's flagship, chaos was unfolding. The generals huddled around a glowing console, their faces grim. "Your Majesty," one of them said, bowing low, "the interference is spreading. Several of our ships have reported temporary weapon failures." The alien king leaned forward on his throne, his golden armor glinting ominously. "Temporary?" he asked coldly. "Yes, Your Majesty. The human signal is not strong enough to cause permanent damage, but it's slowing us down." The king's eyes narrowed. "Find the source. Destroy it." Back on Earth, Elena stood before a large screen displaying the alien fleet's movements. Tiny red dots covered the map, marking the enemy ships. Only a handful of green dots, human strongholds, remained. "We can't win this fight with brute force," Elena said, addressing the room. "Their technology is centuries ahead of ours, but we have something they don't expect." Lieutenant Mason glanced at her, confused. "What do you mean?" Elena turned to a sealed door at the back of the room. "Project Sentinel." The room fell silent. Everyone knew about Project Sentinel, but no one had ever seen it. It was humanity's last-ditch effort, a weapon designed in secret for a moment like this. Mason hesitated. "Dr. Hayes, Project Sentinel has never been tested. If it fails, we're all dead anyway," Elena interrupted. She stepped toward the door, swiping her ID card across a scanner. With a hiss, the door slid open, revealing a massive chamber. Inside was a sleek, silver machine, unlike anything anyone had ever seen. It looked like a cross between a satellite and a missile, with glowing blue lines running along its surface. "This," Elena said, "is our only chance." On the alien flagship, the generals had finally located the source of the disruption. A holographic map appeared in front of the alien king, showing the hidden base in the Rocky Mountains. "Send the fleet," the king commanded. His voice was sharp, his confidence unshaken. "Crush them before they can act." Elena worked quickly, her hands flying over the controls of Project Sentinel. Around her, the team followed her instructions, preparing the weapon for launch. "What exactly does it do?" Mason asked, his curiosity getting the better of him. Elena glanced at him briefly before answering. "Project Sentinel isn't just a weapon. It's a system. It uses their own technology against them. If it works, it will turn their ships into nothing more than floating scrap metal." Mason's eyes widened. "And if it doesn't?" Elena didn't answer. Instead, she focused on the screen in front of her. How much longer until they find us? A technician nearby spoke up. 3 minutes. Maybe less. Above the base, the first alien ships appeared, their massive forms blotting out the stars. Beams of energy fired down, shaking the ground and sending debris flying. The base's shields held, but they wouldn't last long. "We need more time," Mason shouted, bracing himself against the console as the ground trembled. Elena's voice was calm but firm. "We don't have time. We launch now." "Project Sentinel isn't fully powered," a technician protested. Elena turned to face the room, her eyes fierce. "If we wait, there won't be anything left to power it. Launch it now." On the alien flagship, the king watched the attack with satisfaction. "Humans are like ants," he said to his generals. "Crush one nest, and the rest scatter." But then something unexpected happened. A small silver object shot out of the base and into the sky. It moved so fast that even the advanced alien sensors struggled to track it. "What is that?" one of the generals asked, alarmed. The king's smile faded. "A desperate move," he said, though his voice lacked its usual confidence. "Whatever it is, destroy it." The alien ships fired at the object, but it was too fast. Within seconds, it reached the center of the fleet and stopped. For a moment, everything was still. Then a blinding flash of light erupted from the object. The alien ships flickered, their lights dimming. One by one, their weapons and engines shut down. On the flagship, alarms blared. "Your Majesty," a general shouted. "Our systems are failing." The alien king rose from his throne, his expression unreadable. "What have they done?" Back in the base, Elena watched the screen as the alien ships began to drift, powerless. Cheers erupted around her, but she remained tense. "This isn't over," she said quietly. Mason turned to her, confused. "What do you mean?" "We just won." Elena shook her head. "We've bought ourselves time, but the alien king won't stop. He'll find another way, and we need to be ready." Counterattack begins. The alien fleet hung lifeless in the sky, like massive tombs scattered across Earth's atmosphere. Humanity had done the impossible. Project Sentinel had turned the tide. For the first time, the invaders seemed vulnerable. In the hidden base, cheers erupted. Soldiers and technicians hugged each other, their voices echoing through the chamber. Elena, however, stood motionless in front of the main screen. Her eyes were fixed on the data pouring in. "We've only neutralized their fleet," she said, her voice cutting through the noise. "The alien king won't give up this easily." Lieutenant Mason stepped forward, his expression uncertain. "What are you saying, Doctor?" "They're powerless. We should strike now while they're weak." Elena turned to face him, her expression grim. "Exactly. If we don't act now, they'll recover. The alien king has an entire empire at his disposal. This is just the beginning." High above Earth, the alien king stood in his throne room, his golden armor dull under the emergency lights. The once powerful fleet around him was silent, their systems crippled by the human weapon. His generals avoided his gaze, their fear evident. "Pathetic," the king growled, his voice echoing in the chamber. "We underestimated these creatures. That won't happen again." One of the generals hesitated before speaking. "Your Majesty, the humans' weapon seems to have disabled our systems temporarily. Our engineers are already working to restore functionality, but—" The king's sharp eyes turned to the general, silencing him. "No excuses. If our fleet is weak, we will make Earth pay in other ways. Prepare the ground troops. We will remind these creatures who their masters are." In the hidden base, Elena and her team prepared for the next phase. On the screens, footage from around the world showed alien ships drifting helplessly. But even as humanity celebrated, reports of new dangers began to come in. "Dr. Hayes," Mason called out, "we've detected movement near several of the disabled ships. Alien drop pods are descending to the surface." Elena's heart sank. "They're deploying ground troops," she said. "The fleet was just the first wave. Now they're going to fight us face to face." The first alien troops landed in New York City. Massive pods slammed into the ground, releasing squads of tall, armored warriors. Their glowing blue eyes scanned the ruins, and their weapons, sleek and deadly, glowed with energy. Humans in the area fought back bravely. Police officers, soldiers, and even ordinary citizens took up arms, using whatever weapons they could find. But the aliens were fast, strong, and nearly impossible to kill. One young woman, armed with nothing but a baseball bat, stood in front of a group of children hiding in a subway station. She swung with all her strength as an alien soldier approached, her defiance inspiring those around her. But it was clear that humanity couldn't hold out for long. Elena watched the footage with a heavy heart. "We're running out of time," she said. "If they gain control of the major cities, we'll lose the war." Mason frowned. "Then what do we do?" "Project Sentinel only works on their ships. We can't use it against ground forces." Elena's mind raced. "We need to hit them where it hurts. The Alien King's flagship. If we can take him out, the rest of his forces will fall into disarray." Mason hesitated. "That's suicide. His ship is massive, and even with their systems down, they'll have defenses." Elena's eyes narrowed. "We don't have a choice. The Alien King is their leader. Without him, the invasion will collapse." The team quickly assembled a strike force. Soldiers, engineers, and scientists volunteered for the mission, knowing it was their best chance to save humanity. They would use a stolen alien drop pod to infiltrate the flagship. As the team prepared to leave, Elena handed Mason a small device. "This is a signal booster," she explained. "If you can get it to the core of the ship, it will amplify Project Sentinel's effects and disable their systems permanently." Mason looked at her, determination in his eyes. "We'll get it done." The drop pod launched from the hidden base, hurtling toward the Alien King's flagship. Inside, the team sat in tense silence. The pod shook violently as it passed through the atmosphere, and Mason gripped the device tightly. When the pod landed, the doors opened with a hiss. The team stepped out into the cold, metallic corridors of the alien ship. The air was thick with tension, and every sound echoed ominously. "We stick to the plan," Mason whispered. "Get to the core, plant the device, and get out." But as they moved deeper into the ship, they realized they weren't alone. Alien soldiers, still recovering from the effects of Project Sentinel, patrolled the corridors. The team pressed themselves against the walls, their weapons ready. Mason signaled for silence as a squad of aliens passed by. One of the soldiers, a young woman named Riley, accidentally kicked a loose piece of metal. The sound echoed through the corridor, and the aliens turned toward them, their glowing eyes narrowing. "Run," Mason shouted. The team sprinted down the corridor as the aliens opened fire. Energy blasts streaked past them, illuminating the dark hallways. Back on Earth, Elena watched the mission unfold through a live feed. Her hands clenched into fists as she saw the danger the team was in. "Come on," she whispered. "You can do this." The Alien King, meanwhile, stood in his throne room, unaware of the human strike team moving closer to his location. He stared out at Earth, his mind filled with thoughts of revenge. "They think they've won," he said to himself. "But I will show them what true power looks like." The team reached the core of the ship, a massive chamber filled with glowing alien machinery. Mason ran to the central console and began attaching the signal booster. "Hurry up," Riley shouted, firing her weapon at the aliens closing in on them. Mason's hand shook as he worked. Just a few more seconds. As the aliens closed in, the device activated, sending a pulse of energy through the ship. The lights flickered, and the alien soldiers froze in place, their systems shutting down. "We did it," Mason said, breathing heavily. But their relief was short-lived. The Alien King's voice boomed through the ship. "Foolish humans, you've come so far, only to die here." The team looked at each other, fear and determination in their eyes. The battle wasn't over yet. The king's wrath. The chamber trembled as the alien king's voice echoed through the ship. Mason and his team stood frozen, their weapons at the ready. The energy pulse from Project Sentinel's signal booster had shut down the ship's systems, but it hadn't stopped the king. From the shadows at the far end of the room, the massive figure of the alien king emerged. His golden armor glinted even in the dim light, and his glowing blue eyes burned with fury. In one hand, he held a blade made of pure energy, humming with deadly power. "You dared defile my throne," the king hissed, his voice filled with contempt. "You think your primitive technology can stop me?" Mason tightened his grip on his rifle, sweat dripping down his face. "We're not here to stop you," he said, his voice steady despite the fear coursing through him. "We're here to end you." The king laughed, a cold, hollow sound. "End me. You are nothing but insects beneath my feet. I will crush you, as I have crushed countless others." The team moved into defensive positions, spreading out across the chamber. Riley and another soldier, Carter, aimed their weapons at the king. "Open fire," Mason shouted. A barrage of bullets and energy blasts flew toward the king, but he moved with terrifying speed. His blade deflected the shots, and with a flick of his wrist, he sent a wave of energy that knocked Riley and Carter off their feet. Alina watched the battle unfold through the live feed, her heart pounding. "Come on," she whispered. "You've got this." The king advanced on Mason, his steps slow and deliberate. "Your courage is admirable, human," he said, his voice dripping with mockery. "But it will not save you." Mason dodged as the king swung his blade, the energy slicing through the air where he had just stood. He rolled behind a console, trying to catch his breath. Riley staggered to her feet, blood running from a cut on her forehead. She grabbed a grenade from her belt and hurled it at the king. "Take this." The grenade exploded, filling the chamber with smoke and fire. For a moment, the team dared to hope, but as the smoke cleared, the king emerged, his armor barely scratched. "Pathetic," he sneered. Meanwhile, the signal booster continued to emit pulses of energy, weakening the ship's systems. Alina's voice crackled through Mason's earpiece. "Mason, you need to hold him off a little longer. The booster is working, but it needs more time to disable the entire fleet." Mason glanced at his team. They were battered and outmatched, but he knew they couldn't give up. "Understood," he replied. He turned to the others. "We have to keep him distracted. Riley, Carter, cover me." Riley and Carter nodded, firing their weapons at the king to draw his attention. Mason used the distraction to move toward the core of the ship, where the signal booster was located. The king roared, unleashing another wave of energy that sent Riley and Carter flying. He turned his glowing eyes toward Mason, who was frantically working at the console. "You will not escape," the king growled. He raised his blade, preparing to strike. But before he could, Riley dragged herself to her feet, her weapon shaking in her hands. "Hey, you overgrown tin can," she shouted. The king turned, his expression one of annoyance. "You dare challenge me again." Riley smirked, despite the pain she was in. "I dare." She fired a shot directly at the king's face. He deflected it easily, but the distraction was enough. Mason finished inputting the final sequence on the signal booster. "Alina, it's ready," Mason shouted into his earpiece. In the hidden bass, Alina's fingers flew across her keyboard. "Activating now," she said. The signal booster emitted a massive pulse of energy, sending shockwaves through the ship. The lights flickered, and the ground trembled. The king staggered, his movements sluggish. "What have you done?" he roared, his voice echoing with fury. Mason stepped forward, his weapon aimed at the king. "We've just leveled the playing field." The king growled, his glowing eyes dimming slightly. "You think this will stop me? I am the ruler of the greatest empire in the galaxy. I cannot be defeated by humans." Suddenly, the chamber shook violently. The signal booster had done more than disable the ship's systems. It had destabilized its core. Riley grabbed Mason's arm. "We need to get out of here. This whole place is going to blow." Mason hesitated, his eyes locked on the king. The alien leader was weakened, but not defeated. "Mason, let's go," Riley shouted, pulling him toward the exit. Reluctantly, Mason followed. The team ran through the corridors of the ship as alarms blared and explosions erupted around them. Behind them, the alien king's voice echoed one last time. "This isn't over, humans. I will return, and your world will burn." The drop pod launched just as the flagship exploded, a blinding light consuming the massive vessel. Mason and his team watched from the safety of the pod as the wreckage fell toward Earth. In the hidden base, cheers erupted as the feed showed the destruction of the flagship. But Elena didn't join the celebration. She knew the alien king's words weren't just a threat. They were a promise. "This isn't over," she said quietly. "Not yet." Shadows of revenge. The fiery wreckage of the alien king's flagship rained down over the Atlantic Ocean, sending massive waves crashing against distant shores. Across Earth, humanity celebrated its victory, but the mood in the hidden base was far from cheerful. Dr. Elena Hayes paced the control room, her thoughts racing. The alien king's final words echoed in her mind. "This isn't over." Lieutenant Mason entered, bandages covering his arm from the recent mission. "We should be celebrating," he said, watching Elena closely. "The flagship is gone. The king is dead." "Right." Elena stopped and looked at him. "I want to believe that," she said. "But we've seen how resilient they are. The alien king isn't the type to go down without a plan. If he's alive, he'll strike back." Far above Earth, hidden behind the dark side of the moon, a smaller alien ship drifted in silence. Inside, the alien king stood in front of a holographic display, his golden armor scorched but intact. One of his generals approached cautiously, bowing low. "Your Majesty, the flagship is lost, and the human weapon has disabled much of our fleet. What are your orders?" The king's glowing eyes narrowed as he studied the Earth below. "The humans have proven resourceful," he admitted, "but their arrogance will be their undoing. They celebrate their victory, believing they've defeated me. They don't realize the true war has yet to begin." He turned to his general, his voice sharp. "Activate the Shadow Protocol." The general hesitated. "Your Majesty, the Shadow Protocol is untested. It could destabilize the..." The king silenced him with a glare. "Do it. If we cannot defeat them with strength, we will crush them from within." Back on Earth, Mason joined Elena in the control room as she reviewed data from the wreckage. "What exactly are you looking for?" he asked. "Anything unusual," Elena replied. "Something about the way the flagship exploded doesn't sit right with me." Mason frowned. "You think it was a trap?" Elena nodded slowly. "The king is too smart to be caught off guard like that. He must have had a backup plan." As she spoke, an alert flashed on the screen. It showed unusual energy readings coming from several major cities around the world. "That's not possible," Elena muttered, her fingers flying over the keyboard. "What is it?" Mason asked, leaning closer. "The readings match alien technology," Elena said. "But these aren't ships or weapons. It's something different." In New York City, strange devices began to activate, hidden in plain sight among the rubble of the alien invasion. Small, spider-like machines crawled out of the debris, their glowing blue cores pulsing with energy. One of them scuttled into an abandoned subway station, where it attached itself to a power conduit. Moments later, the lights flickered, and a strange hum filled the air. Across the city, people began to feel the effects. Electronics malfunctioned. Communications went down, and an unnatural sense of dread seemed to settle over everyone. The reports flooded into the hidden base. "Dr. Hayes," a technician called out, "we're getting reports from New York, Tokyo, London, and Moscow. People are experiencing strange phenomena. Power outages, hallucinations, even violent behavior. Alina's stomach sank. "It's the Shadow Protocol," she said. Mason raised an eyebrow. "Shadow what?" "It's a psychological weapon," Alina explained. "Instead of attacking our bodies, it attacks our minds. The devices emit a frequency that disrupts human brain activity, causing paranoia, aggression, and fear." Mason's expression darkened. "So they're trying to turn us against each other." "Exactly," Alina said. "If we don't stop this, society will collapse from the inside out." Alina quickly devised a plan. "We need to find and disable those devices," she said. "Each one is likely connected to a central hub. If we take out the hub, we can shut them all down at once." "But how do we locate it?" Mason asked. Alina pulled up the energy readings on the screen. "The devices are sending signals to the hub. If we track those signals, we can find it." Meanwhile, in the shadows of the alien ship, the king watched the chaos unfolding on Earth through his holographic display. Cities were descending into madness as humans turned on each other. "Do you see, General?" the king said, his voice calm and calculated. "Strength isn't always about force. Sometimes, the greatest victory is to make your enemy destroy themselves." The general bowed. "You are wise, Your Majesty. Shall we prepare for the final assault?" The king shook his head. "Not yet. Let the humans weaken themselves further. When they are at their breaking point, we will strike." Alina's team worked tirelessly to locate the hub. Finally, after hours of searching, they pinpointed its location, deep beneath the ruins of New York City. Mason strapped on his gear, ready for another mission. "Looks like we're heading back into the fire," he said. Alina handed him a device. "This is a signal jammer. If you can get close enough to the hub and activate it, it will disrupt the Shadow Protocol and shut down the devices." Mason nodded. "And if it doesn't work?" Alina met his gaze, her expression serious. "Then we'll all find out what happens when the world loses its mind." As Mason and his team prepared to leave, Alina stayed behind, monitoring the situation from the base. She couldn't shake the feeling that the alien king was watching, waiting for them to make their move. "We have to succeed," she whispered to herself. "Humanity's survival depends on it." Into the abyss. The hidden base was eerily silent as Mason and his team boarded the transport heading toward New York City. The ruins of the once bustling metropolis loomed ahead, shrouded in darkness and chaos. The alien devices had turned the city into a nightmare, with people fighting in the streets and shadows flickering unnaturally against the ruined buildings. Inside the transport, the team checked their gear. Riley adjusted her rifle while Carter examined the signal jammer Alina had given them. "Do you think this thing will work?" Carter asked, holding up the small device. "It has to," Mason replied, his jaw tight. "If we can't shut down the hub, the entire world will tear itself apart." The pilot's voice crackled over the comms. "We're approaching the drop zone. The signal hub is underground, near the old subway lines. I can't get you closer without risking detection." Mason nodded. "We'll go the rest of the way on foot. Let's move." The team disembarked into the desolate streets of New York. The air was heavy, almost suffocating, as if the devices were draining the very life from the city. Riley scanned the area with her scope. "No signs of hostiles," she whispered. "But this place feels wrong." They moved cautiously, navigating through the rubble and abandoned vehicles. Every sound, every shadow, felt like a threat. As they approached the entrance to the subway, a loud crash echoed nearby. The team froze, their weapons raised. From the darkness, a figure stumbled into view, a man, his face twisted with fear and rage. "Stay back," Mason called out. But the man didn't listen. He charged at them, wielding a metal pipe. Mason had no choice but to fire, the shot echoing through the empty streets. The man fell, his weapon clattering to the ground. "What's wrong with them?" Carter asked, his voice shaky. "The Shadow Protocol," Mason said grimly. "It's messing with their minds. Let's keep moving." Inside the subway, The air was even thicker, and the strange hum of the alien devices was louder. The team moved silently, their flashlights cutting through the darkness. According to the map Elena gave us, the hub should be just ahead, Mason said. As they turned a corner, they saw it, a massive, pulsating machine embedded in the walls of the subway tunnel. The hub was surrounded by smaller devices, their blue lights casting eerie shadows. "That's it," Riley whispered. Mason examined the area. "Looks like the hub has its own defenses. Those smaller devices are probably sensors or weapons. We'll need to disable them before we can get close." Carter nodded. "I'll set up an EMP charge. That should take them out." While Carter worked, the others kept watch. The sound of footsteps echoed through the tunnel, growing louder. "We've got company," Riley hissed, raising her rifle. From the shadows, alien soldiers emerged, their glowing eyes fixed on the team. Despite the effects of Project Sentinel, these soldiers were still operational, and they were deadly. "Hold them off," Mason shouted. The tunnel erupted into chaos as the team exchanged fire with the aliens. The sound of gunfire and energy blasts echoed through the confined space. Riley took down one alien with a well-placed shot, but more kept coming. "We're outnumbered," she called out. Carter finished setting the EMP charge and activated it. A wave of energy surged through the tunnel, disabling the smaller devices around the hub and momentarily disorienting the alien soldiers. "Now's our chance," Mason yelled. The team rushed toward the hub as the aliens recovered. Mason pulled out the signal jammer and began attaching it to the core of the machine. "Cover me," he shouted. Riley and Carter fired at the approaching aliens, buying Mason precious seconds. The hub's lights flickered as the jammer activated, sending out a countersignal. "It's working," Mason said. Suddenly, the ground shook violently. The hub began to emit a high-pitched whine, and cracks appeared in its structure. "What's happening?" Riley shouted. "The hub's overloading," Mason replied. "We need to get out of here." The team sprinted back toward the surface as the hub collapsed in on itself. Explosions ripped through the tunnel, and debris rained down around them. Outside, the team emerged into the open air, coughing and covered in dust. Behind them, the ground rumbled as the subway tunnel caved in completely. "We did it," Carter said, breathing heavily. Mason checked his comms. "Elena, the hub is destroyed." "Did it work?" In the hidden base, Elena watched the monitors. The energy readings from the devices around the world were dropping rapidly. The shadow protocol was failing. "It worked," she said, relief evident in her voice. "You stopped it." But as the team celebrated, a chilling message played over their comms, a voice they all recognized. "You've won this battle," the alien king said, his tone cold and calculating. "But you haven't won the war. I will return, stronger than ever. And when I do, humanity will kneel before me." The team exchanged uneasy glances. The war wasn't over. Not yet. The final stand. The alien king's chilling message reverberated in Mason's earpiece as the team trudged through the desolate streets of New York. His words were a promise of destruction, and Mason couldn't shake the sense that their greatest battle was still ahead. Back at the hidden base, Elena worked tirelessly, analyzing the data from the destroyed hub. The shadow protocol was offline, and humanity was beginning to recover from the chaos. But the signals from the remaining alien fleet had changed. They were regrouping, preparing for something massive. "They're not retreating," Elena said, her voice tense. "They're gathering for one final assault. This isn't just about Earth anymore. The king wants to make an example of us." A sudden alert blared through the base. "Incoming transmission from the alien fleet," a technician reported. Elena hesitated before accepting the transmission. The alien king's imposing figure appeared on the main screen, his golden armor gleaming and his eyes burning with rage. "Humans," he began, his voice cold. "You've proven yourselves to be more stubborn than I anticipated. But this ends now. My fleet is on its way to your planet, and I will personally see to your destruction." Elena stepped forward. "We're not afraid of you," she said, her voice steady. The king's expression twisted into a cruel smile. "You should be." The transmission ended abruptly, leaving the room in stunned silence. Mason and his team returned to the base, battered but determined. "What's the plan?" Mason asked Elena. She took a deep breath. "The king's fleet is enormous. Even with Project Sentinel, we don't have enough firepower to take them all out." "But we have something he doesn't," Mason said. "A reason to fight." Elena nodded. "We're going to use the last of Project Sentinel's energy to create a weapon powerful enough to destroy the king's flagship, and him along with it. But there's a catch." "What kind of catch?" Riley asked. Elena hesitated. "The weapon will need to be deployed from within the flagship itself. Someone will have to get close enough to plant it and activate it manually." The room fell silent. Everyone knew what that meant. "I'll do it," Mason said finally. Riley started to protest, but Mason raised a hand. "This is bigger than any of us. If we don't stop him now, there won't be a future to fight for." The final battle began as the alien fleet descended upon Earth. Massive ships blotted out the sky, their weapons raining destruction on cities below. Humanity's remaining forces fought valiantly, using every weapon at their disposal to hold the invaders at bay. Mason's team boarded a stealth ship equipped with the experimental weapon. Elena monitored their progress from the base, her fingers flying across the keyboard as she guided them toward the flagship. "You're almost there," Elena said, her voice steady despite the chaos around her. "Stay on course." The stealth ship weaved through the enemy fleet, dodging blasts of energy. Finally, the massive flagship came into view, its golden surface shimmering with an almost unnatural light. "That's it," Mason said. "The king's throne room is at the center. That's where we plant the weapon." The team infiltrated the flagship, moving silently through its labyrinthine corridors. The ship's interior was eerily quiet, the hum of alien technology the only sound. As they approached the throne room, the king's voice echoed through the halls. "I knew you would come," he said, his tone mocking. "You're predictable, like all humans." The massive doors to the throne room slid open, revealing the king seated on his golden throne. His energy blade crackled to life as he rose to face them. "You've fought well," the king said, "but this is where your story ends." Mason stepped forward, his weapon raised. "Not if we have anything to say about it." The battle was fierce. The king moved with impossible speed, his blade slicing through the air. Mason and his team fought with everything they had, but the king was relentless. Carter was struck down, his body crumpling to the floor. Riley took a hit to the shoulder but kept firing, her determination unwavering. "Mason, we're out of time." Elena's voice crackled through his earpiece. "You have to activate the weapon now." Mason looked at the device in his hands. If he activated it, there would be no time to escape. "Riley, get out of here," he said. Riley shook her head. "I'm not leaving you." "That's an order," Mason shouted. Reluctantly, Riley retreated, leaving Mason alone with the king. The king laughed, his blade raised. "You sacrifice yourself for nothing. Your planet will still burn." Mason smirked. "We'll see about that." He activated the weapon, its energy building to a blinding crescendo. The king's eyes widened as he realized what was happening. "No," the king roared, lunging at Mason. The explosion consumed the throne room, a brilliant light that could be seen from Earth. The flagship disintegrated, taking the king and Mason with it. In the aftermath, the alien fleet retreated, leaderless and disorganized. Humanity had won, but the victory was bittersweet. At the hidden base, Elena and Riley watched the skies, tears streaming down their faces. "He did it," Riley said softly. "He saved us." Elena placed a hand on her shoulder. Mason knew what was at stake. He gave everything so we could live. As Earth began to rebuild, Mason's sacrifice became a symbol of hope and resilience. His name would be remembered for generations as the man who stood against the impossible and won. But among the stars, fragments of the alien king's ship drifted in silence, and deep within the wreckage, something stirred.